Right now, on Law&Crime Report, one of the 3 men facing charges in the death of Ahmaud Arbery is the subject of a child molestation investigation.
There is no case against my client. That's not a weak case. That's no case. Plus,
authorities have linked the viral video of the person dubbed the Umbrella Man to a white supremacy group. We discuss.
I ain't got part of that shit.
And later, former NFL player Dana Stubblefield has been convicted of rape. Stubblefield maintains the encounter was consensual. The jury said otherwise.
I'm here to state without any reservation that I am completely innocent of all these allegations.
This is the Law&Crime Report, diving into true crime and all legal stories making headlines. It's Wednesday, July 29th, 2020.
Mr. Bryan, I understand you're entering a not guilty plea. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you have any objection to the court entering that not guilty plea upon the record?
No, sir.
All right. The clerk is instructed then to enter the not guilty plea upon the record.
Mr. McMichael was justified in defending himself against Mr. Arbery's assault. Then there is no case against my client. That's not a weak case. That's no case. And that is obviously important. I don't like necessarily the Georgia law on any of these subjects, but we deal with the law that we have, as Your Honor does.
The court reviewed the evidence that was submitted, the exhibits, and having considered the evidence presented on the defendant's amended motion for bond, the court will enter a written order, but I'll have to get the written order drafted. The order of the court is that bond is denied.
Good afternoon. I'm your host, Bryan Buckmire, here at Law&Crime Report. We start off with William Rody Bryan. Now, he is the third person, the other two being the McMichaels, in connection to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Now, as you saw there, that was a bond hearing where he's received no bond or bail, basically meaning there's no amount of money that will have him released. Unfortunately for him, when it rains, it pours, because the GBI is saying that they are now currently investigating sexual molestation charges against him, specifically as it applies to a child. So it appears that he's got more problems than just the Ahmaud Arbery case upon his horizon. Now, I'm joined with 2 great guests that we've got here, Katie Smith, as well as Adam Konta, both frequent to the Law&Crime Trial Network. Thank you both for being with us. Katie, let's start with you. This just seems like maybe 2020 is a lot worse for Mr. Bryan here than most would expect. He's got the Ahmaud Arbery case and now the child molestation investigation. We don't know all of the details, and of course we don't know the name of the alleged victim. We only know that it's a child based on the charges. What do you make of some of these charges and how it could affect both the cases individually, and is there a potential that one case could affect the other? Sorry, I think we're having a little bit of audio problem. Adam, let me throw the same question to you. They're 2 separate cases, but can you talk to us about the problems or troubles you might have with them individually, and if one could affect the other?
Well, sure, absolutely. And I don't think there are charges yet, from what I understand. I think it's just being investigated for potential child molestation. But they could have a tremendous effect. I think that let's play this out and say this case goes to trial. One, his attorney is going to try to sever his case from the 2 men who actually murdered Ahmaud Arbery. He's going to say, my guy was just a witness. These facts are too prejudicial to put them together. If those cases are separated, what's interesting is that the child molestation case could be evidence of bad acts, bad moral turpitude in the other 2's, in the shooter's cases, but not his own, because the prejudice would by far outweigh the probative value, meaning that if you were in front of a jury and you're being charged with any crime, if that jury hears that you are potentially guilty of molesting a child, the rest of that trial does not matter, because they have already determined you're guilty no matter what the evidence is. So a judge would keep that out more than likely. But it's a bad look for him. It's a bad 2020. And I thought he had a pretty good case with the felony murder charges for Ahmaud Arbery, but this will not help his situation.
Yeah, and you're basically getting at what the federal rules will call like 404B, where you're doing this balancing test of whether it's more prejudicial than probative or probative than prejudicial. Do you think that if I'm assuming the Ahmaud Arbery case would go forward first, because like you said, the child molestation charges, they're not charges as of yet, they're still investigating there, so the Ahmaud Arbery case might go forward in terms of a trial first. When you do that analysis of probative versus prejudicial, sometimes they look at whether or not the cases are similar enough to kind of have one impact on the other. Do you think that a child molestation case could be similar enough that, I mean, the prosecutor's probably going to want to bring it in because it'll make it easier for their case, but do you think that there's a likelihood that that case might be brought into the Ahmaud Arbery case, let's say if Bryan testifies, for example?
So here's what I think will happen. The prosecutor is going to say that the jury should know the charges to better understand who this guy is, what his motives are, how he deals with young people, depending on how old or young the victim is in these child molestation accusations. They might try to create some link there on his general attitude towards youth. And then the defense attorney will say, are you out of your mind? Of course this shouldn't come in. This is the most prejudicial charge in our entire penal law. Jurors are more willing to consider the word of a murderer than a child molester. And that's not, I'm not saying anything controversial there. I think anyone who's watching this, yourself included, can agree that there is no taint worse to get than that of being accused of molesting a child. I think what the judge probably would ultimately decide on is either one, it's out altogether, or two, that they would say you can ask him, have you been charged with a felony? Do you have a pending felony matter currently? And not get into any details of the actual case. So the jury could know potentially that there is an outstanding felony matter, but not the direct allegations.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with you there, because I think no matter how good or bad the evidence would be against Bryan, the second you hear he's charged with child molestation, if he is in fact charged down the road, I could see jurors just being like, all right, time to convict. I'm not going to listen to anything else. And I think that would be a problem if you're truly seeking justice here. But let's take a quick look at the mother of Ahmaud Arbery during the bond hearing and some of the words that she gave for that case.
William Bryan conspired with 2 other men to kill my youngest son. I named him Ahmaud Arbery. I raised Ahmaud on my own in this small community of Brunswick. Ahmaud was loving. Ahmaud worked extremely hard to provide income for our household. Ahmaud also worked hard to be physically fit. Mr. Bryan does not deny getting into his pickup truck and chasing my son. He does not deny blocking his pathway. He does not deny recording the murder of my son. He does not deny being within feet of his co-conspirators as my son was called a racist name as he laid on the ground before passing away. He does not think there's anything wrong with what he did. He wants this court to allow him to go home. I am asking this court to say no. He cannot go home. He did not allow my son to go home. My son ran away. My son actually ran around him, and my son actually ran for his life. But William Bryan did not allow my son to return home. So I stand before you as the mother of Ahmaud, asking this court to give Mr. Bryan the same energy that he gave my son. There is not enough evidence to establish this unrepentant man in being a danger to this community. He lived just feet from where my son was murdered. I lived just miles away from where my son was murdered. I'm actually scared, Judge, to stay inside of my home. I've actually put my house up for sale.
So those are some of the words that the mother of Ahmaud Arbery gave to the court, and the court came up with the decision that no bond or bail should be granted to Mr. Bryan based on the facts that he might either be a flight risk or a risk to other people in the community. Now, as that continues, he's going to be sitting in jail until either a change of circumstance where the defense is able to raise up more points as to why either bail should be given, or if something really crazy, he should be released altogether. I would not expect the latter, maybe the former if something changes. But let's shift ever so slightly, staying on the topic of Ahmaud Arbery, because the three attorneys who are representing the family of Ahmaud Arbery are filing a civil suit, and in a very interesting way. That civil suit is targeting the Glynn County Police, as the attorney is saying that the police share the accountability for the Ahmaud Arbery's death and encouraging neighbors to rely on vigilante justice. I'm again joined with two of our experts here at the Law and Crime Trial Network. Katie, let's start with you. I get it. I understand it. It would be an amazing thing if you can wrap up a civil case with as many people as possible. But when I look at the facts of the case, I'm kind of scratching my head and waiting for this motion to say, how are you going to tie in what these three individuals did with the Glynn County Police? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it'd be really tough, I believe, to hold the police accountable for this, because there's really no affirmative duty by the police, unfortunately, to investigate specific crimes. And that's really what they're relying on in order to pin this on the police. Because essentially their theory is this: had the police really done their job, these vigilantes wouldn't have been responsible for enforcing the law in their neighborhood. So you're really relying on that theory that the police didn't do their job, so therefore they are responsible for the unfortunate loss of life. I think it's a really tough one. A lot of times though, Brian, civil suits are filed to circumvent some sort of criminal discovery. So there might be some ancillary benefits to filing this case other than monetary gain.
Yeah. So Lee Merritt, who's the attorney involved, he said he's filing a civil wrongful death lawsuit within the next 10 days. That was some days ago. So we're anticipating that we're going to see that. But he also said, and I'll throw this to you again, Katie, that he's adding the district attorneys, Jackie Johnson and George Barnell. Now, those are the first two district attorneys who did not see charges here for the three men who had committed this crime. And now we are seeing charges. Specifically, Barnell actually wrote a letter, pretty detailed, saying why there are no charges. Do you think the addition of the two DAs might be helpful in this civil suit by Lee Merritt? Katie.
Again, it's very tough, even harder to hold district attorneys accountable, because they enjoy immunity for their actions when it's involved in the prosecutorial phase. Where you can hold them accountable is if they're doing it in their investigative capacity. That means in investigating whether or not to bring charges. So it's possible that the DAs were acting in their investigatory capacity and would be responsible. But again, you can look through the panoply of case law on this. It's really tough to hold the DAs responsible. So I appreciate what they're doing. If they know more than we do, there might be something there. But on its face, it seems really tough.
Yeah, Adam, let's come to you with the same questions, basically. I mean, Katie's telling us there is a benefit in terms of discovery, so maybe this is a chess move where they might lose a pawn, but they'll gain some momentum there. Or is this really saying, hey, we want to either bring light to the fact that this is difficult to do, or maybe they know something we don't? From what we know so far, how do you see this playing out?
I see this playing out not well for them. I think they're throwing everything against the wall and hoping something sticks. This is about money, I think, honestly, because a police department and a state agency has a lot of money, whereas these three defendants probably do not. So the only way for this family to recover a sizable amount is to sue an institution. I think they're going to have an even tougher time with the DAs that they're trying to include, because even if they find that the DAs acted negligently and not charging them initially, what are the damages there? Because he's already dead. There's no question that the DAs had nothing to do with the death of Ahmaud Arbery. So then it's just a matter of, well, like an added pain and suffering for a couple of weeks that charges didn't come the way they should have. I think it's not going to work out well for the Arbery family on these two particular issues. I think they have a slam dunk case against the three defendants, but if they don't have any money, you know, the old saying, you can't bleed a stone. So I think they're trying to get a defendant in the case that has some actual means.
That's an interesting perspective, and I would tend to agree, because you can't go after these three individuals for any substantial amount of money, even though you might have a claim. And in these civil cases, oftentimes you got to go for the biggest pocket. Let's see how it all plays out. They say they're going to file a motion in the next couple of days, and we'll definitely be here to analyze that when they do. We'll be back with Law and Crime Report right after this break. For our next case, you want to talk about something that happened quite long ago, 1969. Van Houten, she was 19 years old at the time, and she was convicted to a life sentence for the death in her participation of the Manson cult that was led by Charles Manson. Now she's up for the parole board, and for the fourth time in a row, they are deeming her fit for release. However, the family of Sharon Tate, specifically her sister Deborah Tate, are advocating against that, saying that she's not only fearful for herself and for her family, but also society. This brings into question the concepts of release for some of the most heinous of crimes. There is no doubt in anyone's mind, especially the jury, after she was found guilty, that she participated in this cult and participated in the stabbing of at least one victim. And in that, the question becomes, a 19-year-old, now 70, the state is saying, or at least the parole board is saying, that she should be released. Now it's left to Governor Newsom, and people are advocating that she should not be released. Again, I'm joined with our experts, Katie Smith, as well as Adam Konta. Adam, let's start with you. 1969, it's now 2020. There's no doubt in anyone's mind how horrendous the cult that she participated in, how horrendous the actions that she committed to. But 19 to 70, do we think that that's a changed person, and do we think that that person is no longer a danger to society and should be released? I guess that's the kind of conversation we're here to have.
To me, this is a Deborah Tate issue. This is someone who lost her sister while she was pregnant. Leslie Van Houten wasn't even in the house when Sharon Tate was murdered. It's obviously a very sensational case, so it's had media for the last 50 years. So Deborah Tate has had a platform for 50 years. But the idea that Leslie Van Houten doesn't deserve a shot at life on the outside after serving 51 years in prison is really sort of unbelievable to me. Because what that says is that people have no ability to be rehabilitated, and it says that if you join a very vicious and controlling cult, which this is maybe the most famous one in our country's history, that you alone are responsible for your actions, even if you are under the direction of a very charismatic and powerful leader, in this case, Charles Manson. I think that this is a hill not worth dying on for her, and that she needs to find some place in her heart to believe that people can be rehabilitated. Leslie Van Houten has served over half a century. It's time that she's paroled.
Yeah, and I agree with both points. Both the point that I understand Deborah's point as an older sibling of three, and I get the frustration and the anger that you would have, and I think that is truly valued, because we don't know how that was for her, because that's a very specific emotional pain. But then the question becomes, as a society, how do we want rehabilitation to look, and how do we want that to be affected? Just some of her quotes. She says, the danger of letting these people out of prison is ever present and real. I'm scared, not just for myself and other family members who may be targeted, but society as a whole. Katie, will bring you the same question. I think that Deborah should have every ability to voice her objection, because we need that in the conversation. But is there an ultimate goal here to rehabilitation, that maybe she should be let out after 50 plus years? What are your thoughts?
I mean, in general, I always think that rehabilitation is important, and in spirit, I agree with what Adam had said. But we forget here that the Manson murders were not just about Sharon Tate. There was a whole underlying idea of creating civil unrest, specifically racial wars, behind their concept of helter-skelter. This had large implications. So this wasn't just about this one murder. I don't know subjectively if releasing her, this would create a risk. And I certainly think at the age she's at, there's less societal risk. But this is a bigger case than just one person. And I can understand the reticence to want to let her out.
Yeah, and just giving more of her quotes, she's talking about, because obviously she's hearing the back and forth that we're kind of participating as well from a larger concept of talking about her age, that she's was 19 then and now is 70. I mean, I sometimes think of myself. I think of who I was when I was 19 till today at 32, and those two people are very different. I can only imagine when I turn 70 how much I would grow and change, so I can kind of understand the difference of age. But she points out that age is immaterial to a psychopath, basically. There is no cure for that, and the disposition of committing a violent crime does not have an expiration date. No criminals, and criminals do not retire. Sorry about that. So I hear what you're saying. There's a lot more levels to this, Katie. Adam, taking in all those levels and understanding the piece that Van Houten played in that, do you still kind of have the same mentality, or do you have like an overarching idea, or is this like a case-by-case specific concept for you?
No, I mean, I think what Katie said. This was a tremendously hot button case at the time in the late '60s, in the height of Haight Ashbury. It had more media attention than anything else because of Helter Skelter, where they used the Beatles, because of Roman Polanski's house. But we're not talking about Charles Manson. We're not talking about the guy who was trying to start a race war. We're not talking about the guy who was leading these followers into this horrible and despicable series of events. We're talking about a 19-year-old kid that was obsessed with a very attractive, very charismatic, and very powerful man. And that man, if we were talking about him, we would have a very short discussion, because we would say, keep him in jail. No question. Keep him in jail. And that would be the end of it. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who's a victim in herself of falling prey to this person. Did she do tremendous wrong? Yes, she did. But 50 years, I think we're sending the wrong message to society that we do not believe in a path to redemption, and we do not believe in a path to rehabilitation by keeping her in prison. Someone who was 19, on the outskirts of this cult, as far as any sort of leadership or any sort of real forming their ideals or their plan. She was there, she made a horrible, life-altering mistake, and she has paid for it decade after decade.
Yeah. And just for context, Charles Manson did die in 2017 of natural causes while incarcerated. Let's change gears ever so slightly. When we were covering a lot of the protests and riots in Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd, we started to see some very peculiar situations of individuals damaging property. And you would often see protesters pulling out their cameras and saying, "What are you doing? You're not a part of this." And the person would be completely covered, and the story just dropped. The story's picked back up. The man that they're dubbing the Umbrella Man, they're currently trying to get more information from him, and they have not released any real facts about who he is, but we are hearing that he might be connected with a white supremacy group. Let's give you some context as to what we're talking about by looking at the video of some of the damage and destruction that he participated in.
I ain't got part of that shit. Dude. Oh, I zoomed in. I'll zoom out a little bit. Those cops will come for you if you're pulling that crap.
Now, the investigation continues, but what we're hearing so far is that not only is this Umbrella Man connected with white supremacy, but he's also in connection, as you saw there, with not only property damage, but also arson that occurred around the time that sparked a lot more of the violent protests, as well as a lot of the violent response from the police department. So at least part and parcel, people are saying that he is the spark that started a lot of the violence and the turmoil that led from some of these protests. Again, I'm joined with Adam and Katie. Katie, let's start with you. This seems very disgusting, I think is a proper word here, if we're looking at someone who is coming from the outside of either sides of this protest to cause disruption, to further violence. What did you make of some of this story when you first heard it?
The part that really bothers me is that he's doing it to try to blame it on the left. And I think that that's what's particularly interesting about this is the political underpinnings of why this is happening. It's not just that he was genuinely trying to stir up some discord for his own benefit ostensibly on its face. He was trying to blame it on other people. At least that's what I'm getting from what I've been reading about it. And that to me is particularly disturbing. But, once we start to scratch the surface of getting information about protesters and diving deep into their phone records, we just start really going down a slippery slope of how much information do we unearth with people who are involved in these protests. Now, there's a big difference between protests and vandalism. Obviously, he's on the wrong side of that. But there are some larger issues that we have to consider once we start infringing on people's privacies associated with these protests.
Yeah. Now, Adam, the police department there in Minneapolis is still asking people, hey, give us your video. There are search warrant affidavits that are out. And what they basically did is first they failed to find the right person, again, because you can only see kind of like this part of him. Now they're saying they found the person after receiving a tip about his identity using the photographs, including a driver's license, to zero in on a suspect who has ties with Hell's Angels and a prison biker gang. Talk to us more about the same concept Katie touched on, about how this really not only affected that community, but also kind of the country at large and kind of really stoking flames into this protest.
Well, let me back up for a second, because I take issue with one thing Katie said. This is not a protester. Don't lump him in with protesters. This is not a protester, and this is not someone whose rights were infringed upon for protesting. This is a bad person who left his house that day to do harm to both a movement and to a specific building. This is a criminal action from beginning to end with no intent of furthering any sort of social justice cause. I think the police did a fine job here. They didn't invade anybody's privacy. They asked the public for tips to find a criminal, and they found him. And I think this is a really good day. And I hope that this plays out the way it looks like it's going to, because this is something that from the top down, from our president down, has been saying that these protesters are looters and they're bad people. And it's people like this umbrella man, this criminal, that has given them the talking points to be able to get up with a straight face on national TV and say these things. But this is not what protesters are out there trying to do. There have been tremendous movements and tremendous amounts of good over the last couple months that have come from some really terrible situations. So to see that one of the more famous sort of looting, arson, property damage was in fact incited just to discredit that movement just goes to show how scared a lot of specifically white people are.
Yeah, and the arson investigator touched on that exact point, Adam, saying that in the short time, because that was an AutoZone, I'm not sure if you can see the full clip there, you can see the top of it. In the short time after that AutoZone was destroyed by the umbrella man, as we're calling him, looters came in, fires were started, and they're, again, calling him as the spark that started this all. And I think that was one of the first fires that we actually saw, and the arson investigator actually says that set off a string of fires and looting throughout the precinct and the rest of the city. And to do that to a movement, again, you're saying they're scared and they're trying to discredit as much as they can rather than having actual debate and actual arguments and allowing for protesters to do their protest in a legal way, protected by their rights. We're going to continue with more stories after this break here at the Law&Crime Report, right after this break. Welcome back. A protester in New York was arrested by plainclothes officers and shoved into a minivan without any handcuffs, which brought some fears in general from people about what was happening in Portland, to see if that was actually going to be something that's carrying on in New York City. Now, the NYPD has released information to give more light as to what actually happened there, and we're finding out more about that story. That story seems to entail that that woman had used, at least at 5 different occasions, according to NYPD, that she had spray painted in New York. I'm not sure if everyone's from New York. In New York, basically, the NYPD has on some of their intersections cameras in different areas, just to ensure, especially around federal buildings or around certain parts of New York City, just to ensure that no one's committing crimes or just kind of keep an eye on the city. What it appears is that this woman, on a number of occasions, spray painted those to inhibit their ability to see protesters or to inhibit people's their ability to see people camping out at City Hall. When the police identified her on the street, they quickly acted and ended up arresting her. We're going to see if we can see a quick clip of her arrest right now, and we'll jump right into it. So again, joined with Adam Konta and Katie Smith. Katie, let's go to you first. I know we both practice in New York. On a number of occasions, we had our clients come in with a warrant squad sitting there next to them, and we find out details of how they're getting arrested. We know that warrant squad here in New York are plainclothes and do not typically operate in their vehicles to allow them to do their job. The argument there is somewhat strong. Obviously, there's counter arguments to that as well. What did you make of this interaction with the warrant squad and how they went about this arrest?
I mean, sadly, it's not super uncommon that this is the way the warrant squad operates, right? I mean, this is what they do in part in order to be able to effectuate their job, to be able to arrest someone who has an outstanding warrant. They don't want to come up and with all the bells and whistles and look like they're in their uniform, because a lot of times those people will flee. So it is not uncommon at all whatsoever to have, if there's an active warrant out on someone, for the warrant squad to be in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle to effectuate an arrest. Was it a good look to do this in the middle of a protest? It's not great. I mean, they're allowed to do it, obviously, because a warrant means that there's active probable cause. You can arrest that person. The one place you can't do it is if you're in the middle of a court proceeding. So, I mean, was it fair game? Yes. Did it look suspicious? Yes.
Yeah. And Adam, same question. I mean, I think Katie, I can't agree more. She hit all of the nails on the head there. I think it's kind of an issue of what are their powers, people understanding what their powers are, and then a general PR look. I can understand in this day and age, and maybe right now, July 29th, 2020, that looks horrible and scary, and it's a bad look on the NYPD. But also on the other flip side, what they're putting out is, and if we believe them to be true, which I don't always believe the NYPD, but let's operate in that way right now. They were within their right to do that, to grab her and arrest her in that way. Maybe not as violently, but that was legal. What do you think?
I think this is a President Trump issue. I think when President Trump sent unmarked federal agents into Portland, he ignited a sense of fear amongst the nation that he has the ability and authority to send exactly what I just said, unarmed federal agents into your city to take you off the street without announcing charges or anything like that. So I get why the protesters were upset. But let's be fair here. These cops did nothing wrong. A warrant squad's design is to pick up people who either have a warrant out for their arrest or who have evaded a court appearance and are actively evading capture. It's a very dangerous job. It's one of the more dangerous jobs in the NYPD or in the police force. You cannot have a uniform. You cannot have a marked car in order to do your job well. Maybe they could have announced that they were NYPD a little more clearly. I don't know. But to me, this is a non-story for the NYPD. I don't see anything that they did wrong there. They had every right to arrest her, and the warrant squad had every logical and normal reason to arrest her the way that they did.
All right. Well, let's switch gears. You've brought up the issue of the feds coming into Portland and committing those arrests. Let's talk about another federal agency that's doing amazing work. I think no one will disagree in this regard, where the Homeland Security or HSI agents have seized millions of dollars, let's put it at a number, more than $7 million in COVID-19 fraud proceeds, and they made 53 arrests. What's happening is that people, doctors and other agencies, are making false CARE Act reports and trying to get more than they are actually allowed to get. And the problem with this, and I think there are multiple problems, is you're defrauding the government, you're harming people at a time where we are in the middle of a pandemic, where we are trying to fund agencies to truly help people. Because there are people across the country, whether you are a small business person, whether you are on food stamps, whether you're Republican, whether you're liberal, whether you're tall, short, black, white, anything in between, we're trying to help people, and here you have people frauding the system. I think this is something that we can all get behind and truly have some discuss, but also applaud the investigation and stopping this. Katie, let's come to you. When you first heard this story, talk to us about some of this fraud that you heard and how they're just defrauding people left, right, and center to the tune of over $7 million.
The first thing I thought was, man, I'm not surprised. You know, the minute you start to open up an avenue for new fraud, people just dive right in and do it every time. And this always reminds me of Medicaid or Medicare fraud, because as you aptly said, there's basically two people are getting screwed over here. The public are, because these individuals are hawking false products saying that they will help to prevent the spread of COVID, that they will also help to cure COVID. So that in and of itself is fraud. And then you have fraud on the other hand, which is like the Medicare and Medicaid fraud, where you're then billing the government for these false items. So you're really, I'm very happy to see the government coming down on this, because this is where we see the people getting harmed two ways. And this needs to be done. So bravo.
Yeah, and I apologize for reading at this, but I want to make sure I get the numbers right before I throw it to Adam, because the numbers I think are so important here. They're talking about seizing more than 900 shipments of counterfeit or substandard medical equipment and supplies. That included test kits and purported treatment of COVID-19. They're actually telling the public, hey, be careful what you're getting, because some of these are not doing what they're telling you they're going to do, and they're counterfeit, or like they're saying subpar, and so you're hoping that you're going to get better because of this, but you're not. The agency brought up this announcement after 100 days of this, what they're calling, and I usually hate their names, but this name I think is aptly named, Operation Stolen Promise, which was meant to, quote, protect the homeland from the increasing and evolving threat posed by COVID-19 related fraud and criminal activity. You can see there from the graphic we're showing you, they initiated 570 criminal investigations, made 53 arrests. The agencies, again, more than $7 million in illicit proceeds, including $2.2 million obtained through fraud related to the CARES Act. Adam, this seems to be the federal government working in a way that it was designed to do so, and getting those fraudulent people out of the system and are making those proper arrests. What did you make of this story?
I actually don't love this story. I think this story is a little too sensational, and I think it conflates. I think these numbers are conflating two things. Stopping 900 shipments of faulty or substandard PPE and medical equipment, that should be end of story. That is a hugely serious issue. You're putting many people's lives at risk, and you're putting people whose lives help other people's lives at risk. So the trickle-down effect of who you're potentially harming is tremendous. Now, $7 million in fraudulent loans, that sounds like a lot, and I get that that's why they put that in the story. That's nothing. $7 million is I couldn't even begin to guess, 0.00001% of loans given out. I mean, that tells me actually that most people have done right, that there have been a lot of, that almost everyone who has taken out a loan has done the right thing and has used it to help themselves in a way that is totally within the law. I just don't see $7 million being a number that's worth making part of a story that is as serious as 900 shipments of faulty PPE equipment.
Yeah, and I'm going to circle back to that, Adam, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please stop me if I'm saying this the wrong way. And I just want to throw some more facts about one of these fraudulent acts involved a Washington state doctor who fraudulently sought $3 million in Paycheck Protection Program, and another Georgia woman who was arrested for attempting to import and sell unregistered pesticides that alleged claim to protect against COVID-19. But I agree with you wholeheartedly, Adam, because what I don't like is when you look at that number of 7 million and then you compare it to what's given in total, and then people throw up their arms and be like, there's so much fraud, we can't give out these services, there's so much fraud. And I think, and please stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, that twist of using fraud in that way, in a very minor way, to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater, that I hate. But we're going to take a quick break and come back. You haven't interrupted me, Adam, so I'm thinking you're agreeing with me. But we're going to come back with a quick break, and we'll come back with our last story for the day. It's been almost 5 years since the allegations that led to the arrest of Dana Stubblefield, former NFL player for the San Francisco 49ers. But through COVID and all that waiting, he was eventually found guilty. And now there's a potential of him facing 15 years to life as he awaits the sentencing. But let's go back in time to almost 4 years ago when Mr. Stubblefield came out in a press conference and absolutely denied the allegations, something that the jury disagreed with.
Morning. I'm here to state without any reservation that I am completely innocent of all these allegations. I've worked my whole career to be a part of the Bay Area community, and I've worked in several communities and charities with the church. This is an issue that's very close to me. One of my primary charities is Special Olympics. something that's true and dear to my heart. This is why these allegations hurt me so badly. But I am not a perfect man. However, the allegations against me coming a year after a consensual encounter with another woman are all totally false. I'm here today to state this clearly.
So just as a recap, the former defensive tackle was found guilty by his jury for charges of rape by force while using a firearm, oral copulation by force, and false imprisonment. The facts of it are, though, that he was found guilty of luring a developmentally disabled woman to his Morgan Hill home in April of 2015 with the promise of a babysitting job after contacting her through a website. Now, as I said earlier, he faces 15 years to life imprisonment. He was recently found guilty because that court proceeding had gone for about 2 months, was paused because of COVID-19, and then picked back up just a few days ago. Again, I'm joined with Katie Smith and Adam Konta. Katie, to you first. There's a lot of things in this story that kind of baffle me. The first one for me was, wait, we're still doing trials during COVID-19? That was interesting enough. But also just the case in of itself. Talk to us about COVID-19 trials as well as the rape case that came to an end.
Well, trials during COVID are obviously very rare. I mean, you have so many problems, especially, I mean, I can speak from New York directly. I was actually in a very similar situation as to this trial. We had a jury impaneled. We put months of evidence on the table, and we were about to do deliberations, and it got temporarily adjourned. And then all of a sudden, COVID happened even more severely, and missed trial, have to do it all over again. So initially, when I hear this, I think, boy, there's going to be a lot of grounds for appeals, because I imagine if I was his attorney, I would argue up, down, left to right that this was unfair, that these jurors felt uncomfortable, that they didn't render a verdict that they would have done but for being forced to go back during these COVID restrictions. So I don't know, I didn't hear the transcript, so I don't know if there were objections made, which is necessary to make that appeal, but I imagine that they were.
Now, Adam, just a little bit more facts to throw in here. The way the prosecutor laid it out, Stubblefield invited or lured this 31-year-old into his home, for the purpose of that babysitting job. When she left, he texted her to come back saying, hey, let me pay you for your time. And it was at that point in time that I can't say allegedly anymore, but he raped her and gave her $80 for her time. She reported immediately while handing that $80 to the police, and upon a DNA investigation, the DNA matched to that of Stubblefield. So it seemed like a pretty open and shut case from an evidentiary standpoint for the trial, and maybe that's how the jury came to that conclusion. What did you make of that case and a conviction in the midst of COVID-19?
Well, again, we're talking about two separate things. The evidence was strong, and her reporting was immediate. She has, I would say, her learning disabilities work in her favor as far as credibility goes. There's less, I think there's more reason to believe her story. But I don't think that's the story here. The story here is the conviction in the age of Corona, of COVID. I don't know how any conviction like this can stand, because you can make a very colorable argument that the jury had a multi-month gap in evidence. Then when they came back, they had other weeks of nothing while they waited to come back and go and come and go and come and go. And so how do you know that these jurors, when they were actually in the jury room, when they were actually deliberating, whether they had access to all the evidence they wanted to, whether they felt comfortable continuing and deliberating, or whether they just wanted this nightmare of a situation to be over, and it's more likely than not he did it, so let's just convict and get out of here. I think this would be a really, I'll be curious to see what happens, because I think this is going to be a tough conviction to uphold, even though the evidence separately is very bad for Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah. Now, the district attorney said this was a triumph for resilience, and of course, the defense attorneys are saying they're seeking another trial. Adam and Katie, I want to thank you very much for being here with us today. We appreciate your insight. We're going to be back more with our regularly scheduled program after this, and of course, we'll have the Law and Crime Report tomorrow with another host. We'll see you again tomorrow, guys. Have a good day.